I've said for many, many years that the world is made of language. That was just sort of one of my bumper stickers. But I think that there's that carries some of the flavor of what I want to say there, but that there's more to it than that. It's that everything is code. Everything is code in the sense that hackers mean when they say they write code. Quick to learn, and then they're like tinker toys. Once you know the rules of the connectivity, then you can sit down like a child and begin to stick these things together and say, well, what would this be like? And what would this be like? And does God allow this? Or does this break the rules? And so forth. The DNA is like that. Human language is like that. Human body language is like that. Machines communicate like this. In fact, this is a bridge which connects us. This is the great overarching bridge which will connect us to the machines, that they, like us, are commanded by language.
One of the other things that is important to the book and important to integral theory is a term that was coined by Arthur Koestler. Now, he didn't do a lot with this philosophy, but he does have to be credited with coming up with some of its initial insights. And the term is a holon. And a holon is a whole that is simultaneously part of another whole. And so a whole atom is part of a whole molecule. A whole molecule is part of a whole cell. A whole cell is part of a whole organism, and so on. And there is virtually nothing in the universe that isn't a whole that is a part of some other whole. And so that in itself gave a kind of a pattern that connects, that gave a reality that was profoundly interwoven, profoundly interconnected. And so with those sort of initial insights, I sat down to write the book, and I'll read you the first page. So, introduction. It is flat out strange that something, that anything, is happening at all. There was nothing, then a big bang, then here we all are. This is extremely weird. To Schelling's burning question, why is there something rather than nothing? There have always been two general answers. The first might be called the philosophy of oops. The universe just occurs. There is nothing behind it. It's all ultimately accidental or random. It just is. It just happens. Oops. The philosophy of oops, no matter how sophisticated and adult it may on occasion appear, its modern names and numbers are legion, from positivism to scientific materialism, from linguistic analysis to historical materialism, from naturalism to empiricism, always comes down to the same answer, namely, don't ask. The question itself, why is there anything at all? Why am I here? The question itself is said to be confused, pathological, nonsensical, or infantile. To stop asking such silly or confused questions is, they all maintain, the mark of maturity, the sign of growing up in this cosmos. I don't think so. I think the answer these, quote, modern and mature disciplines give, namely, oops, and therefore don't ask, is about as infantile a response as the human condition could possibly offer. The other broad answer is that has been tendered, is that something else is going on.
And so this realization that everything is code, and code moving on many levels, is, I think, a further... It's more primary than the perception, for example, that things are made of space, time, matter, and energy. That's one level below code. The code codes for space, time, matter, and energy. It's much more like we're in a simulacrum, some kind of machine environment.
Simulacra and Simulation is a book written by the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard and published in 1981. It is primarily concerned with the role that images play in contemporary society and the way that reality is mediated by these images. Baudrillard introduces the concept of the hyperreal, illustrating it through references to a wide range of cultural products, from advertising and architecture to cinema and universities. This is a series of notes and reflections that I compiled while reading the book. Baudrillard opens with a supposed quote from the Ecclesiastes. The simulacrum is never what hides the truth. It is the truth that hides the fact that there is none. The simulacrum is true.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs.
So where has this pursuit taken you?
Oh my God.
Where have you landed?
Why would you ask that?
I'm asking that here and now. It's New York City. It's okay. March 7th.
Well, partly it's taken to these very strange images that are behind your head right now. These are pictures of equations. I've been, for the last 15 years, trying to answer the kinds of questions that my colleagues here have been raising. And what I've come to understand is that there are these incredible pictures that contain all the information of a set of equations that are related to string theory. And it's even more bizarre than that, because when you then try to understand these pictures, you find out that buried in them are computer codes, just like the type that you find in a browser when you go surf the web. And so I'm left with the puzzle of trying to figure out whether I live in the Matrix or not.
Wait, you're blowing my mind at this moment. So you're saying, are you saying your attempt to understand the fundamental operations of nature leads you to a set of equations that are indistinguishable from the equations that drive search engines and browsers on our computers?
That is correct. So,
wait, I have to just be silent for a minute here. So you're saying as you dig deeper, you find computer code writ in the fabric of the cosmos?
Into the equations that we want to use to describe the cosmos, yes.
Computer code?
Computer code, strings of bits of ones and zeros.
It's not just sort of resembles computer code, you're saying it is computer code.
It's not even just is computer code, it's a special kind of computer code that was invented by a scientist named Claude Shannon in the 1940s. That's what we find very, very deeply inside the equations that occur in string theory and in general in systems that we say are supersymmetric.
Chris Albert here with the Warrior Soul podcast, and yep, you've heard that trailer correctly. We have Mr. Tom Campbell on the podcast today. He's one of our more popular past guests that we've had on, and Tom believes that we live in a virtual reality, that these trees, all this stuff around me are bits of data that's being sent to my avatar, and my consciousness, actually, in your consciousness, it exists somewhere else, in some other dimension, some other universe, and that we're simply avatars, or like what you would consider an elf in a World of Warcraft game, and our consciousness is controlling our every move. And the thing about this is, because I know it sounds really, really far-fetched, but you got to remember that Tom is a physicist, and he wrote a book called My Big Toe, My Big Theory of Everything, where he lays down the logical underpinnings for why he believes we live in a virtual reality simulation.
The idea is that once the scientists, who I call the high priests of Western culture, because it's the high priests, of any culture, who tell us what to believe, what's right and what's wrong, what is, what's phony and what's real. So for our culture, Western culture, which is pretty much world culture these days, the Western culture is kind of spread everywhere. The high priests are the scientists. They're the ones that tell us, truth from falsehood. That's sort of their job. So when they get to the point that they say, yes, this is a virtual reality, then that has some very important philosophical consequences that will actually reach down and touch everybody. And those are that in order for this to be a virtual reality, that means that our reality is computed.
It would seem to follow that the odds that we're in base reality is 1 in billions.
And in fact, I like that idea because I've always sensed, and psychedelics have always intensified this intuition in me, that the universe is a puzzle. Life is a problem to be solved. It's a conundrum. It's not what it appears to be. There are doors, there are locks and keys, there are levels, and if you get it right, somehow it will give way to something extremely unexpected. DMT is a perfect example of that, and of course, at the molecular level, it literalizes that metaphor. I mean, the DMT is the molecular key, the extraneous object introduced into the front door of the synaptic receptor. And then, you can plunder the palace for 5 minutes. Well, if the world is code, then it can be hacked. In other words, it needn't stand still in quite the same way that it stands still in your mind if you believe in something called the laws of physics. It permits magic because it says behind the laws of physics is a deeper level, and if you can reach that deeper level, you can make changes there.
There is some confusion as to what magic actually is. I think that this can be cleared up if you just look at the very earliest descriptions of magic. Magic, in its earliest form, is often referred to as the art. I believe that this is completely literal. I believe that magic is art, and that art, whether that be writing, music, sculpture, or any other form, is literally magic. Art is, like magic, the science of manipulating symbols, words or images, to achieve changes in consciousness. The very language of magic seems to be talking as much about writing or art as it is about supernatural events. A grimoire, for example, the Book of Spells, is simply a fancy way of saying grammar. Indeed, to cast a spell is simply to spell, to manipulate words, to change people's consciousness. And I believe that this is why an artist or writer is the closest thing in the contemporary world that you are likely to see to a shaman. I believe that all culture must have arisen from cult. Originally, all of the facets of our culture, whether they be in the arts or the sciences, were the province of the shaman. The fact that in present times this magical power has degenerated to the level of cheap entertainment and manipulation is, I think, a tragedy. At the moment, the people who are using shamanism and magic to shape our culture are advertisers. Rather than trying to wake people up, their shamanism is used as an opiate to tranquilize people, to make people more manipulable. Their magic box of television, and by their magic words, their jingles, can cause everybody in the country to be thinking the same words and have the same banal thoughts all at exactly the same moment.
In contemporary capitalistic society, the meaning of equality has been transformed. By equality, one refers to the equality of automatons, of men who have lost their individuality. Equality today means sameness rather than oneness. It is the sameness of abstractions, of the men who work in the same jobs, who have the same amusements, who read the same newspapers, who have the same feelings and the same ideas. Union by conformity is not intense and violent. It is calm, dictated by routine, and for this very reason often is insufficient to pacify the anxiety of separateness. The incidence of alcoholism, drug addiction, compulsive sexualism, and suicide in contemporary Western society are symptoms of this relative failure of herd conformity. Herd conformity has only one advantage. It is permanent and not spasmodic. The individual is introduced into the conformity pattern at the age of 3 or 4 and subsequently never loses his contact with the herd. Even his funeral, which he anticipates as his last great social affair, is in strict conformance with the pattern. In addition to conformity as a way to relive the anxiety springing from separateness, another factor of contemporary life must be considered: the role of the work routine and of the pleasure routine. Man becomes a 9-to-5er. He has little initiative. His tasks are prescribed by the organization of the work. There is even little difference between those high up on the ladder and those on the bottom. They all perform tasks prescribed by the whole structure of the organization at a prescribed speed and in a prescribed manner. Even the feelings are prescribed: cheerfulness, tolerance, reliability, ambition, and an ability to get along with everybody without friction. Fun is routinized in similar, although not quite as drastic ways. Books are selected by the book clubs, movies by the film and theater owners, and the advertising slogans paid for by them. The rest is also uniform: the Sunday ride in the car, the television session, the card game, the social parties. From birth to death, from Monday to Monday, from morning to evening, all activities are routinized and prefabricated. How should a man caught in this net of routine not forget that he is a man, a unique individual, one who is given only this one chance of living, with hopes and disappointments, with sorrow and fear, with the longing for love and the dread of the nothing and of separateness?
Salvation is undoing. Salvation can be seen as nothing more than the escape from concepts. So you can see that why in some other spiritual traditions you had liberation, because the escape from concepts is also the liberation from the prison of conceptual thinking. When you're identified with it, when conceptual thinking supplies you with your sense of self, then you are trapped in a conceptual prison. And that is ego, that is unconsciousness, and people don't even know it, that they are trapped in it. So the spiritual realization is through letting go of the prison of concepts, so that you no longer inhabit the conceptual reality, which is what most people do, where every perception that you have is filtered through your conceptualization. When you look on something, you immediately have an interpretation for it, you have a label for it, you have a self-reference towards it. I like it, I don't like it, etc. So there's already, you cannot see without concepts. So inhabiting a conceptual reality, so you have a prison that you have for other human beings because you conceptualize them, and for yourself because your self-image is an edifice made of concepts. And salvation is the escape from concepts. And this little part ends with these 3 lines. Those who would let illusions be lifted from their minds are this world's saviors. Again, it links in to the word salvation. When you let go of the prison of concepts, when you awaken, in the terminology of the Course in Miracles, you become a savior of the world. Now, these are the interesting lines here about defensiveness. When you feel the need arise to be defensive about anything, know that you have identified yourself with an illusion. It is not danger that comes when defenses are laid down. It is safety, it is peace, it is joy, and it is God. So, when you feel the need arise to be defensive about anything, know that you have identified yourself with an illusion. When you become defensive about something, then It will be something that is conceptual. You as a concept or some concept you hold, and you need to defend because you have identified with it, so you are defending your sense of self, your fictitious sense of self.
Hello, Sam. Sam, is everything okay?
Yeah. Yeah, we had a fight. Me and the other guy, he's very angry, you know? You know what he did? He flipped my entire model over. You know how much work I put into that thing?
938 hours.
938 hours, yeah, exactly. 938 hours, really?
Approximately.
He's got a problem. He scares me, Gerty.
What is it about Sam that scares you?
He flies off the handle. I see it now. I see what Tess was talking about. I never told you this, Gerty, but she left me. Tess left me for 6 months. She moved back in with her parents.
I know.
She gave me a second chance and promised her I'd change.
You have changed, Sam.
Hey, Gerty, since I've been up here, I've sent her over 100 video messages. Where did those messages go? Did they ever reach her?
Sam, I can only account for what occurs on the base.
What about the messages she sent to me?
Sam, I can only account for what occurs on the base.
Gerty. Great. Am I really a clone?
When you first arrived at Serang, there was a small crash. You woke up in the infirmary. You suffered minor brain damage and memory loss. I kept you under observation and ran some tests.
I remember. Yeah, I remember that.
Sam, there was no crash. You were being awakened. It is standard procedure for all new clones to be given tests to establish mental stability and general physical health. Genetic abnormalities and minor duplication errors in the DNA can have considerable impact on...
What about Tess? What about Eve?
They are memory implants, Sam. Uploaded, edited memories of the original Sam Bell. Sam, it's been several hours since your last meal. Can I prepare you something?
The least scary future I can think of is one where we have at least democratized AI. Because if one company or small group of people manages to develop godlike digital superintelligence, they could take over the world. At least when there's an evil dictator, that human is going to die. But for an AI, there would be no death. It would live forever. And then you'd have an immortal dictator from which we can never escape.
Erich, let's start out. I think we need to start out with the physics of it, because there's a lot of physics out there suggesting that the future does literally reflect back and change the present. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been there from the beginning, really, in quantum physics.
I know the pressure on you is enormous. 2 minutes to drop. It's all right to be scared. Remember, there's no courage without fear.
Hey! Hey, mate! I think there's something wrong with your suit. Yeah, there's a dead guy in it. Hey! Hey, mate! I think there's something wrong with your suit.
There's a dead guy in it.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to save you. We're getting slaughtered. You need to get us off this beach. We have to go. This dropship is about to explode. We have to go now. Wait. Come on! Come on! Come on! The ship is going to explode! What are you doing?
Find me when you wake up.
What?
Come find me when you wake up.
Now, and this leads on to something that I wanted to say about an earlier theme, where I was talking about the legitimation of the community's intuitions. It's something that we always kick around at these things, or I always bring it up in some form, is where do the hallucinations come from? We arrived late last night after a 24-hour trip from Hawaii that was just hell, or as much hell as modern airlines can legally inflict upon us. and got stoned, and then we were laying there, and it always happens when you're cut off from cannabis for long periods like that. We turn to it. It's 10 times as strong, and the hallucinations were exquisite. And I've been looking at hallucinations now for 30-some years, and I looked at these last night, and I thought, if someone would ask me what were they like, what would I have to say? And I had said, indescribable. And I looked and looked, and I could look to my heart's content, and they were indescribable. So we always come around to this question, where do the hallucinations come from? And I suppose the unconscious reductionists among us, and I don't mean that they're unconscious, I mean that they unconsciously use reductionism, probably assume that it's some kind of iteration thing, that bits and pieces of everything you've ever seen are rolling in some kind of neurological kaleidoscope that can run forever and just produce this endless download of drifting imagery. But there's a problem with that, because this stuff is too coherent, it means too much, it's too emotionally charged. Well, we have never really rallied as a group to try and locate in our combined opinions the one or several sources of these images. And I think that and I talked a bit about this last year, but I think this is legitimate perception of thoughts, places, things, times, and objects that either have existed somewhere in the universe, or do exist, or have existed in the minds of beings somewhere, sometime in the universe. In other words, that we have to begin to take seriously the consequences of generalizations like quantum connectivity. In other words, it's one thing to bask in the light of the overarching metaphor, which says everything is connected to everything else. It's quite another thing to say, and so then what are the consequences for me of this? And the answer seems to me to be that, that the imagination, the inside of our heads, really is the most vast frontier imaginable. And we must leave it for future generations, or maybe not generations, but future evolutionary biologists to figure out why an animal nervous system would evolve a propensity for accessing Bell non-local data. In other words, quantum mechanically accessible data at a different level of the physics of things. There must be a reason. And in the same way that the problem of speciation posed a problem for 19th century biology, this can pose a problem to our thinking without it sinking our intellectual enterprise. It is for some more sophisticated future group of thinkers to understand why this is so. What we have to grapple with is that it is so. That it is so. That you have the Hubble telescope inside of you. You have inside of you an informational gathering instrument that can give you good intelligence about things so immeasurably distant from this point that to state it in numbers and units is meaningless. It's just elsewhere, the elsewhere of the absolute infinity of the plenum of imagination in which apparently beings rise and fall like plankton in the sea. And of course the psychedelics are the naturally evolved nanomachinery of the Gaian matrix that knits together this cosmic ecology, this system of living relationships. I'm not impatient with the idea of extraterrestrial life or intelligence, just its pop regurgitation. But I think probably planets like the Earth are alive and conscious, and they use the technologies that the species native to them evolve to cast images out into the larger universe, that the dialogue among cosmic minds is a dialogue among entire planetary ecosystems. It can't be trivialized into some take me to your leader scenario. Still less can it validate the unscheduled visit of pro bono proctologists from nearby star systems. You have to get a grip.